The space around Vega was quiet and empty. That was how the Xanathi liked it. Their ships floated in the darkness, like giant crystals made of light. Each ship was the size of a small moon, but weighed almost nothing. They had been there for 300 years, watching and thinking. The Xanathi were different from every other race in the galaxy. They did not fight wars. They did not build empires. They did not even talk much to other species. They spent their time in deep thought, trying to understand the universe through peace and silence. That Captain Jake Morrison had been flying through space for 15 years. He had seen many strange things, but nothing like the ships near Vega. His human exploration ship called the Endeavor was small compared to the crystal ships. It looked like a tiny metal ant next to floating mountains of light. Jake was not afraid. Humans were curious by nature. Even when they probably should run away, they wanted to know more. Jake ordered his crew to move closer to the crystal ships. He wanted to make contact. The first sign that the Xanathi noticed them was a soft humming sound that filled the Endeavor. It was not unpleasant. It sounded like singing, but without words. The humming seemed to come from everywhere at once, even from inside their own heads. Dr. Linda Hayes ran to her instruments. She was the ship's expert on alien life forms. Her machines showed readings she had never seen before. The crystal ships were giving off energy, but not the kind that powered engines or weapons. This energy seemed to touch thoughts and feelings. Then the voice came. It was not really a voice. It was more like someone thinking very clearly inside their minds. The thoughts were calm and gentle. Welcome, small travelers. We are the Xanathi. We mean you no harm. We are curious about your kind. Jake had talked to many alien species before. Most of them were either scared of humans or wanted something from them. The Xanathi seemed different. They felt peaceful in a way that made Jake's shoulders relax without him noticing. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human ship Endeavor. We come in peace. We would like to learn about your people. Peace, the voice repeated, and there was something like happiness in the thought. Yes, we sense this in you. But also something else. Something we have not encountered before. Would you be willing to meet with us face to face? Jake looked at his crew. Dr. Hayes nodded eagerly. She lived for moments like this. Lieutenant Bobby Kane, the ship's security officer, looked worried, but did not object. First contact was always risky, but the Xanathi did not feel dangerous. We would be honored to meet you, Jake replied. One of the crystal ships began to change. Part of its surface became transparent, like a window. Inside, Jake could see a large space filled with soft, blue light. Shapes moved in the light, but he could not make them out clearly. A smaller crystal ship separated from the larger one. It was still bigger than the Endeavor, but it felt less overwhelming. The small ship approached slowly and carefully. A docking tube extended from its side. Jake, Dr. Hayes, and Lieutenant Kane put on their spacesuits and walked through the docking tube. The moment they stepped into the Xanathi ship, they felt different. The air was warm and seemed to sparkle. Their spacesuits detected that the atmosphere was safe to breathe, but they kept their helmets on just in case. The inside of the ship was beautiful. The walls were made of the same crystal material as the outside, but they glowed with gentle colors that shifted slowly from blue to purple to green. The floor felt solid under their feet, but it looked like they were walking on light itself. A shape approached them from deeper in the ship. As it came closer, Jake realized he was looking at one of the Xanathi for the first time. The being was tall and thin, almost twice as tall as a human. Its body seemed to be made of the same crystal material as the ship, but it was alive and moving. Light flowed through its form like blood flows through human veins. The being had no face in the way humans understood faces. Instead, its head was a smooth crystal dome that pulsed with soft light. When it spoke, the light grew brighter. "I am Elder Kalen," the being said, though its thoughts still came directly into their minds. "I have been chosen to speak with you because I am curious about your species. The Xanathi have observed many races over the centuries. Most follow patterns we can understand. You do not." Dr. Hayes stepped forward. She was trying hard not to stare, but the Xanathi was the most beautiful and strange creature she had ever seen. "What do you mean we don't follow patterns?" she asked. Elder Kalen moved closer. As it did, the humans felt a strange sensation, like someone was gently looking through their memories and feelings. It was not invasive or uncomfortable. It felt like being understood in a way they had never experienced before. Most species, when they develop the ability to travel between stars, follow one of three paths, Elder Kalen explained. They become conquerors, seeking to dominate others. They become traders, seeking profit and advantage. Or they become explorers, seeking knowledge for its own sake. You are explorers, but also something more. Jake was fascinated. "What else do you see in us?" "Contradiction," Elder Kalen said, and there was wonder in the thought. "You have the capacity for great violence, yet you choose restraint. You could take what you want by force, yet you ask permission. You fear death, yet you risk your lives for strangers. You are individuals, yet you sacrifice for your groups. We have never encountered such complexity in a single species." Lieutenant Kane spoke for the first time. "Is that good or bad? From your perspective?" Elder Kalen was quiet for a long moment. The lights in its crystal form pulsed more slowly, as if it was thinking deeply. "We do not know," it finally answered. "The Xanathi achieved peace by choosing simplicity. We removed contradiction from our nature. We exist partly in your physical realm, and partly in what we call the Serene realm, where there is no conflict, no doubt, no struggle. For 3,000 years, we have been perfectly at peace. Dr. Hayes felt compelled to ask, "But are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise Elder Kalen. The light in its form flickered in a way they had not seen before. "Happiness is a concept we left behind long ago," it said. "We sought something higher than happiness. We sought serenity, perfect calm, perfect understanding, perfect peace. But," Jake said carefully, "if you have perfect peace, why are you curious about us? Curiosity suggests that you want something you don't have." The flickering in Elder Kellen's form became more pronounced. For several moments, the Xanathi did not respond. When it finally did, its thoughts carried an emotion they had not sensed before. It might have been confusion, or it might have been something deeper. "We have been watching your species since you first left your home world," Elder Kalen said. "We have seen you make choices that we cannot understand. You help those who cannot help you in return. You fight for principles rather than profit. You mourn for enemies you have defeated. You are the first species we have encountered that seems to grow more complex rather than more simple as it evolves." Dr. Hayes was taking notes as fast as she could. This was the discovery of a lifetime. "We would like to learn more about you," she said, "and we would be honored if you would learn more about us." Elder Kalen seemed to consider this. The other Xanathi in the ship gathered around them, their crystal forms creating a circle of gentle light. Jake could feel their attention like warm sunlight on his skin. "Yes," Elder Kalen finally said. "We believe we would like that very much. For the first time in many centuries, we are curious." As the humans prepared to return to their ship, none of them could have guessed that this simple meeting would change the fate of the entire galaxy. The Xanathi had lived in perfect peace for 3,000 years. But peace, they were about to learn, was not the same thing as rightness. And sometimes, the most peaceful choice was to fight. 3 months had passed since the first meeting between humans and the Xanathi. Captain Jake Morrison had returned to Earth to report the discovery. Dr. Linda Hayes stayed behind with a small research team to continue studying the crystal beings. The two species were learning about each other slowly and carefully. The Xanathi were patient teachers. They showed the humans how they lived partly in the physical world and partly in what they called the Serene realm. Elder Kalen explained that the Serene realm was a place of pure thought and emotion, where anger and fear could not exist. It was where the Xanathi found their perfect peace. Dr. Hayes was fascinated by how the Xanathi had evolved beyond physical needs. They did not eat food or drink water. They absorbed energy directly from stars and converted it into the light that flowed through their crystal bodies. They did not sleep, but they meditated for hours at a time, their forms becoming so still. They looked like statues, but the peaceful exchange of knowledge was about to end. The first distress signal came from the outer colonies. Commander Alex Bennett was stationed at New Portland, a human settlement on the edge of explored space. He was drinking his morning coffee when his communication officer, Lieutenant Susan Parker, burst into his office. "Sir, we're receiving emergency transmissions from multiple systems. The signals are coming from everywhere at once." Alex followed her to the communication center. The main screen showed a map of the local galaxy, with red dots appearing one after another. Each red dot meant a colony or settlement that was under attack. "This can't be right," Alex said. "Who has the resources to attack this many targets at once?" The answer came in the form of a broadcast that reached every inhabited system in the galaxy. The transmission showed a massive alien with gray skin and sharp teeth. Behind him stood representatives of 11 other species, all armed and ready for war. "I am High Commander Vex of the Hegemony," the alien announced. "For too long, this galaxy has been divided among weak and scattered peoples. Today, that ends. The Hegemony will bring order through strength. Surrender now, and you will be allowed to serve. Resist, and you will be removed." Alex felt his blood turn cold. The Hegemony was made up of 12 of the most aggressive species in the galaxy. Individually, none of them could threaten the major powers, but together, they were a force that could destroy entire civilizations. The reports came in fast after that. The Hegemony had launched coordinated attacks on 47 different worlds. But they were not attacking military targets or major colonies. They were hitting peaceful settlements, research stations, and trading posts, places that had no defenses and no way to fight back. The strategy was clear and brutal. The Hegemony was avoiding the strong and targeting the weak. They would build their empire on the backs of those who could not resist them. Colonel Frank Williams received orders to take his regiment to Altair Prime, where the peaceful Velani had built a beautiful city among crystal formations. The Velani were artists and philosophers. They had no weapons and no military. They believed that violence was a disease that intelligent beings should have outgrown long ago. When Frank arrived at Altair Prime, he found the Velani city in ruins, the crystal. Formations had been shattered by Hegemony weapons. The beautiful spires where the Velani created their art were now slave barracks, where families were separated and forced to work. In mining operations, Frank's soldiers were angry. They had trained to fight other soldiers, not to rescue civilians from slave camps, but they did their job anyway. They fought their way through Hegemony defenses to reach the prison compounds. The rescue was costly. The Hegemony used the Velani prisoners as human shields. Frank's soldiers had to advance slowly and carefully to avoid hitting innocent people. By the time they reached the main compound, 70% of Frank's regiment was dead or wounded. But they did not retreat. They could not retreat while innocent beings were suffering. Sergeant Mike Torres carried 3 Velani children to safety while enemy fire exploded around him. He was hit twice, but kept moving until the children were safe. Lieutenant Carol Adams used her own body to shield an injured Vellani elder from falling debris. She died saving someone she had never met and whose language she could not speak. Hegemony expected humans to fight like other military species. They expected them to calculate costs and benefits, to retreat when losses became too high, to make deals to protect their own interests. But humans did not fight like other species. They fought for principles that had no price. They died for people they did not know. They refused to abandon the helpless, even when it would have been logical to do so. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human fleets moved toward occupied worlds, often against impossible odds. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the main defense fleet. Her orders from Earth were simple but seemed impossible to follow. Defend the defenseless, regardless of species or political affiliation. Captain Danny Roberts found himself facing a hegemony battleship near the Proxima system. The enemy ship was twice the size of his cruiser and carried enough firepower to destroy him easily. But intelligence reports indicated the hegemony ship was carrying captured civilians from 3 different species. The logical thing to do was retreat and call for reinforcements. The safe thing to do was avoid a fight he could not win. But Roberts had a choice to make: save his own ship and crew, or risk everything to save people. He did not know. Roberts chose to fight, but he did not fight to destroy the enemy ship. He fought to disable it without harming the prisoners. His ship took terrible damage in the process. Half his crew was killed. But when the battle ended, over 2,000 civilians were free. Essenathi watched all of this from their crystal ships. They had sensors that could observe events across the galaxy. They saw every battle, every rescue, every sacrifice that Daru humans made for strangers. Elder Kalen called the Circle of 13 the highest council of the Xanathi. They had not met in over a century. Through their shared consciousness, they discussed what they were witnessing. The humans are fighting. Elder Vash observed. This is their nature. Violence and conflict follow them wherever they go. But look at how they fight, Elder Kalen replied. They do not fight for conquest. They do not fight for resources. They fight for others. Fighting is fighting, Elder Nix stated. The Serene realm teaches us that violence always leads to more violence. We should withdraw before we are drawn into their conflicts. But Elder Kalen was not convinced. He had been studying human behavior for months. He had seen patterns that troubled his perfect serenity. Dr. Linda Hayes was still with the Xanathi research team when the war began. She watched Elder Kellen's crystal form pulse with unusual energy patterns. The other Xanathi noticed it too. Their leader was experiencing something they had not seen in 3,000 years: emotional disturbance. What troubles you, Elder Kalen? Dr. Hayes asked. Your species confuses us, Kalen replied. We achieved peace by removing contradiction from our nature. We became simple, pure, focused only on serenity. But you have not removed contradiction. You have embraced it. I don't understand, Hayes said. You are capable of great violence, yet you choose mercy. You could save yourselves by abandoning others, yet you risk everything for strangers. You fear death, yet you face it willingly when principles are at stake. You are the most contradictory species we have ever encountered, yet you may also be the most moral. The word seemed to surprise Kalen as he thought it. The Xanathi had moved beyond concepts like morality when they achieved perfect serenity. Right and wrong were complications that disturbed inner peace. But watching humans fight and die for others was disturbing Kellen's inner peace in a different way. For the first time in millennia, he was feeling something the Xanathi had left behind. Moral urgency. More reports came in. The hegemony was winning through sheer numbers and brutality. They had enslaved billions of beings across dozens of worlds. They were building a war machine powered by forced labor and stolen resources. The major galactic powers were staying neutral. The conflict was too far from their territories to matter. The cost of intervention was too high compared to the benefits. They made logical, rational decisions to protect their own interests. But humans kept fighting. They kept dying for principles that made no economic sense. They kept choosing the hard path when easier options were available. Elder Kalen found himself asking a question that should not have existed in a perfectly serene mind. What if peace was not the highest virtue? What if there were things more important than serenity? The thought was heretical by Xanathi standards, but it would not go away. As he watched human soldiers sacrifice themselves to save alien civilians, Kalen began to understand that his people's perfect peace might be incomplete. Xanathi had achieved serenity by avoiding difficult choices. Humans seemed to find meaning by making them. Elder Kalen could not find peace. For 3,000 years, he had lived in perfect serenity. His mind had been calm like a still lake. His thoughts had flowed smoothly without anger, fear, or doubt. But now something was wrong. The other Xanathi noticed the change in him. His crystal form flickered with unusual patterns of light. During meditation, his body would pulse with energy instead of remaining perfectly still. He was experiencing what the Xanathi had not felt in millennia: inner conflict. The circle of 13 gathered in the great chamber of their largest ship. The 13 eldest Xanathi formed a ring of crystal light, their shared consciousness connecting them in perfect harmony. All except Kalen. "You are disturbed, brother," Elder Vash observed. "Your serenity is broken. Perhaps you should withdraw from observing the humans. Their violence is affecting your inner peace." "It is not their violence that disturbs me," Kalen replied. "It is their choices." Elder Nix pulsed with confusion. "We do not understand." "Choice is the source of all conflict. We achieved peace by moving beyond choice to pure acceptance of what is. But what if what is wrong?" Kalen asked. The question sent ripples of shock through the shared consciousness. The concept of right and wrong had been abandoned by the Xanathi long ago. Such judgments created emotional disturbance. In the Serene realm, all things simply were Dr. Patricia Stone had replaced Dr. Hayes as the human ambassador to the Xanathi. She was a former military officer who had become a diplomat after losing her leg in a peacekeeping mission. Patricia understood both war and peace better than most humans. She had been listening to the Xanathi debate through a translation device. Now she spoke up, her voice carrying clearly through the crystal chamber. "Elder Kalen, may I show you something?" The Xanathi turned their attention to her. Patricia activated a holographic projector and began showing recordings from the recent battles. But these were not the usual military reports. These were personal recordings from individual soldiers. The first recording showed Sergeant Bobby Martinez during the rescue at Altair Prime. Bobby was carrying a wounded Vellani child when enemy fire began hitting all around them. The child was crying in fear, making sounds that no human could understand. But Bobby began singing a lullaby that his own mother had sung to him as a baby. The child stopped crying and held on to Bobby as he ran through the explosions to safety. This soldier could have moved faster without the child, Patricia explained. He could have saved himself more easily, but he chose to risk his life for a being he had never met. The second recording was from Lieutenant Karen Foster aboard a damaged space station. The station was losing atmosphere, and there were not enough oxygen masks for everyone. Karen took off her own mask and gave it to an injured alien civilian. She died 3 minutes later from lack of air. "She had a choice," Patricia said quietly. "Live or let someone else die." She chose to die so a stranger could live. The third recording was the most powerful. It showed Captain Danny Roberts facing the hegemony battleship. Roberts had discovered that the enemy ship was using captured civilians as shields. His tactical officer was telling him to fire anyway. The civilians were already doomed, and they could not save them by getting themselves killed. But Roberts refused to fire. Instead, he ordered his ship to ram the enemy vessel at low speed, knowing it would cripple his own ship. The impact disabled both vessels, but it also allowed rescue ships to reach the prisoners. Roberts and most of his crew died in the collision, but 2,000 civilians lived. He could have followed military logic, Patricia said. He could have fired and probably survived. But he chose to sacrifice himself rather than accept that those people had to die. Elder Kellen's crystal form was now pulsing rapidly with light. The other Xanathi were becoming alarmed. They had never seen one of their kind in such a state of agitation. "These are not the actions of a violent species," Kalen said, his thoughts carrying new emotions. "These are the actions of beings who have chosen to be better than their nature." "They are still fighting," Elder Vash pointed out. "Violence is violence, regardless of the reason." "Is it?" Kalen asked. "Is the violence of the hegemony, who enslave the innocent, the same as the violence of humans who die to free them?" The question hung in the shared consciousness like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples spread through all 13 minds, disturbing their perfect calm. Patricia showed them more recordings. Human soldiers sharing their food with hungry prisoners. Human medics treating wounded enemies. Human pilots flying hopeless missions to evacuate civilians from doomed colonies. But the recording that changed everything was from a small human outpost called Haven Station. The station commander, Major Lisa Brooks, had received orders to evacuate when hegemony forces approached. But Haven Station was home to 3,000 refugees from 12 different species. The evacuation ships could only carry half of them. Lisa faced an impossible choice. She could save herself and half the refugees, or she could stay and try to defend everyone with her small garrison of 30 soldiers. The recording showed Lisa's final transmission to Earth Command. "We cannot save everyone, but we can choose who we become in the trying. Haven Station will not abandon the helpless. We will stand and fight, no matter the cost." Lisa and her 30 soldiers held off a hegemony fleet for 6 hours. They all died, but their sacrifice bought time for additional rescue ships to arrive. All 3,000 refugees were saved. Elder Kalen felt something break inside his crystal form. For the first time in 3,000 years, he experienced what humans called grief. Not just sadness, but the sharp pain of loss mixed with admiration. For courage he could barely comprehend. "They choose to suffer," he said, his thoughts now carrying wonder instead of confusion. "They choose to die. They choose to face impossible odds. But they do not choose these things because they want to suffer. They choose them because they refuse to let others suffer alone." The other Xanathi were deeply disturbed. "They're perfect." Serenity was being shattered by concepts they had abandoned long ago. Right and wrong, good and evil, justice and injustice. These ideas brought conflict, and conflict brought pain. But Elder Kalen was beginning to understand something his people had missed in their pursuit of perfect peace. Some pain was worth feeling. Some conflicts were worth having. "We achieved serenity by removing ourselves from moral choices," he said. "We thought this made us evolved. But these humans face moral choices every day, and they choose to do right, even when it costs them everything. Who is truly more evolved?" Elder Nix pulsed with alarm. "You speak of abandoning 3,000 years of spiritual growth. You would return us to the chaos of emotion and conflict?" "I speak of completing our spiritual growth," Kalen replied. "We learned to find inner peace, but we stopped learning. These humans are still growing, still choosing, still becoming better than they were." Patricia stepped forward. "Elder Kalen, There is something else you should know. The human government has issued new orders to all military commanders. They are to continue defending innocent populations, regardless of the cost. Earth knows this. War might destroy humanity, but they will not abandon their principles to survive. This news sent shockwaves through the Xanathi consciousness. An entire species was choosing potential extinction over moral compromise. Such a choice was beyond anything they had ever witnessed. Elder Kalen rose from his meditation position. His crystal form was now blazing with light, pulsing with energies that had been dormant for millennia. The other Xanathi recognized what was happening, the great stirring, an awakening that their ancient texts said would come when perfect serenity was no longer enough. "I have made a decision," Kalen announced. "For 3,000 years, we have watched the galaxy from our crystal ships. We have observed conflicts and remained neutral. We told ourselves this was wisdom, but wisdom without action in the face of injustice is not wisdom at all. It is cowardice." The words created chaos in the shared consciousness. Several elders began to withdraw, their forms flickering as they retreated deeper into the serene realm. But others remained, their light growing brighter as they too felt the stirring of long-dormant emotions. "What are you proposing, Elder?" Zara asked. She was the youngest of the circle, having achieved elderhood only 500 years ago. "I propose that we have been wrong," Kalen said. "We thought peace meant avoiding conflict. But true peace means ensuring that the innocent are protected and the guilty are stopped. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is fight." Patricia could hardly believe what she was hearing. The most peaceful species in the galaxy was talking about abandoning their neutrality. The implications were staggering. "The humans have shown us something we did not know existed," Kalen continued. "They have shown us that it is possible to evolve, not by becoming simpler, but by becoming more complex. They embrace contradiction and find strength in it. They choose to suffer for principles that cannot be measured or weighed." Elder Vash made one final attempt to preserve their ancient ways. "If we abandon our serenity, we may never find it again. We could become like them, conflicted, struggling, never at peace." Elder Kellen's crystal form pulsed with a new kind of light, warmer and more alive than the cool glow of perfect serenity. The announcement shocked the entire galaxy. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Xanathi had broken their vow of neutrality. Elder Kellen's message reached every inhabited world through quantum communication arrays that had been silent for centuries. "People of the galaxy," Kellen's thoughts carried across space and into the minds of billions of beings. "The Xanathi have watched in silence for too long. We have seen evil triumph while good beings suffer, and we have done nothing. This ends today. We stand with humanity not because we approve of war, but because we finally understand the difference between violence born of hatred and violence born of love." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On Earth, President Maria Santos called an emergency session of the Global Council. Military commanders who had been planning desperate last stands suddenly found themselves with the most powerful allies in the galaxy. But it was not just the promise of Xanathi help that changed everything. It was what their decision represented. The most peaceful, most spiritual species in known space had looked at the conflict and chosen a side. They had declared that some things were worth fighting for. Captain Joe Anderson received orders to command the first joint Human Xanathi Task Force. Joe was a veteran of 12 combat missions, but nothing had prepared him for working with beings made of living crystal and light. When the Xanathi ships moved for the first time in centuries, it was like watching mountains learn to dance. The target was Beta Centauri, where the hegemony had built their largest slave processing facility. Intelligence reports indicated that over 50,000 beings from 30 different species were being held there. The facility was heavily defended by a hegemony. Fleet that outnumbered the Joint Task Force 2-1. Joe stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defender, watching the Xanathi vessels move into formation alongside his fleet. Elder Kalen had chosen to accompany the mission personally, his massive crystal ship dwarfing the human vessels around it. Captain Anderson, Kellen's thoughts reached Joe's mind. Our people have never fought together before. We must learn quickly if we are to succeed. What can your ships do in combat? Joe asked. He had read the technical reports, but seeing Xanathi technology in action was different from reading about it. We exist partly in your physical realm, and partly in the Serene realm, Kalen explained. This allows us to affect the emotions and thoughts of others. We can turn rage into confusion, certainty into doubt, fear into calm. But we have never used these abilities as weapons before. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Johnson, commanding the Marine assault teams, joined the conversation. Can you help our soldiers stay calm during the fighting? Fear makes people make mistakes. We can do more than that, Kalen replied. We can help you fight with precision instead of anger. We can guide your aim so that you disable rather than destroy. We can help you remember that even your enemies are living beings worthy of mercy. As the joint fleet approached Beta Centauri, they encountered the first hegemony patrol ships. The enemy vessels immediately opened fire, expecting a conventional battle. But what happened next had never been seen before in galactic warfare. Human ships moved with unusual coordination, their weapons fire precise and controlled. Instead of trying to destroy the enemy vessels, they targeted specific systems, engines, weapons, communication arrays. The hegemony ships found themselves disabled but not destroyed. Their crews alive but unable to fight. At the same time, something strange was happening aboard the enemy ships. Hegemony soldiers who had been filled with battle rage suddenly felt confused and uncertain. Their anger faded, replaced by a growing sense that what they were doing was wrong. Commander Thack of the Hegemony Patrol Fleet found himself staring at his tactical display and wondering why he was fighting. For the first time in his military career, he questioned his orders. The feeling was so alien to him that he thought he was becoming ill. Sir, his communications officer reported, the enemy is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're asking us to surrender. Surrender? Thek repeated. The word felt strange in his mouth. Why would they want us to surrender instead of destroying us? The answer came from Captain Anderson's transmission. Hegemony vessels, you are defeated, but not destroyed. Your crews are alive because we chose to spare them. We do not seek your deaths, only the freedom of those you have enslaved. Surrender now, and you will be treated with dignity. Thak looked around his bridge. His crew members were staring at their instruments with confused expressions. The battle rage that had driven them for years was gone, replaced by something they had never felt before, doubt about their cause. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly, perhaps we should consider their offer. For a species that had been bred for conquest, the suggestion should have been unthinkable. But under the influence of Xanathi Serenity projections, the hegemony crews were able to think clearly for the first time in their lives. And when they thought clearly, they realized that enslaving innocent beings was wrong. One by one, the hegemony patrol ships powered down their weapons and surrendered. Dr. Maria Lopez served as tactical coordinator for the joint fleet. She watched in amazement as the liberation of Beta Centauri proceeded with minimal casualties on both sides. The Xanathi influence was allowing human forces to fight with a precision and restraint that would have been impossible in normal combat. But the real test came when they reached the slave processing facility itself. The massive station was defended by automated weapons that would fire on any approaching ship. There were no enemy crews to influence, no minds to calm with Xanathi abilities. We have to do this the hard way, Colonel Johnson reported. The automated? Defenses are too strong for a frontal assault. Elder Kellen's crystal form pulsed with determination. Not necessarily. We may not be able to affect machines, but we can affect the people controlling them. The Xanathi reached out with their consciousness, searching for the hegemony technicians who were operating the defense systems from inside the station. What they found shocked them. The technicians were as much prisoners as the slaves they were. Guarding, they had been forced to work under threat of death to their families. Kalen made contact with the lead technician, a being called Grix, whose species had been conquered by the hegemony years earlier. Grix had been forced to design the very weapons that kept his own people enslaved. You do not have to serve them. Kellen's thoughts reached Grix. Help us free your people and ourselves, and we will ensure that you and your family are safe. Grix hesitated. He had lived in fear for so long that the idea of resistance seemed impossible. But the Xanathi serenity touched his mind, calming his terror and allowing him to think clearly. What do you need me to do? Grix asked Dot. With Grix's help, the automated defenses were turned off section by section. Colonel Johnson's Marines were able to enter the station without facing heavy resistance. But what they found inside was worse than anyone had imagined. The slave processing facility was a nightmare of industrial efficiency. Beings from dozens of species were sorted by physical capabilities and assigned to different types of forced labor. Families were separated systematically to prevent organized resistance. Children were taken from their parents and trained to serve the hegemony from birth. Sergeant Mark Williams led the team that breached the main holding area. What he saw there would stay with him for the rest of his life. Thousands of beings crammed into spaces barely large enough to lie down. Many were sick or injured from overwork and poor conditions. Some had been there so long they could barely remember their home worlds. But the worst part was the fear in their eyes. When the human soldiers appeared, many of the prisoners cowered in terror. They had been told that humans were even more brutal than their current captors. Mark removed his helmet and knelt down beside a group of frightened children from the Villani species. They had large, gentle eyes that reminded him of his own daughter back on Earth. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're here to take you home." The children did not understand his words, but they understood his tone. When one of them reached out tentatively to touch his face, Mark felt tears running down his cheeks. These were the beings the humans were dying to protect. This was why the war mattered. The liberation of Beta Centauri took 6 hours. When it was over 50,000 beings had been freed. But more importantly, the galaxy had witnessed something unprecedented. 2 completely different species working together not for conquest or profit, but purely to do what was right. News of the victory spread quickly through the galaxy's communication networks. Other species began to reconsider their positions. The peaceful Valdari sent their merchant fleets to carry supplies to refugee camps. The scholarly Epsilon provided intelligence about hegemony operations. Even some members of the hegemony itself began to question their allegiance. Captain Anderson stood on the observation deck of the Defender, watching as the freed prisoners boarded transport ships that would take them home. Elder Kellen's crystal form hovered beside him, its light softer and warmer than before. "Your people have changed us," Kalen said. "We thought we had achieved perfection through serenity. But you have shown us that perfection is not a destination. It is a choice we make in each moment to be better than we were before." The final battle was coming. Supreme Commander Helen Carter stood in the war room on Earth, looking at a map that showed the current state of the galaxy. The human Xanathi Alliance had liberated dozens of worlds, but the hegemony still controlled their home system of Rigel and hundreds of other planets. The intelligence reports were not encouraging. High Commander Vex had gathered the largest military force in galactic history around Rigel. Over 3,000 warships waited in defensive positions. The hegemony was making their last stand, and they intended to make it costly. But something had changed since the war began. 6 of the 12 species that made up the hegemony had switched sides. The brutal Korthek were still loyal to Vex, as were the machine-like Nexari and the predatory Zhao. But the others had seen what the Human-Xanathi alliance represented and decided they wanted to be part of it instead. Admiral Tom Baker, the hegemonies, former fleet commander for the Taurian sector, had brought his entire battle group over to the alliance. When Helen asked him why he had changed sides, his answer was simple. I joined the hegemony because I thought strength was the only thing that mattered. But your people showed me that there is something stronger than weapons. There is courage, driven by love. The defections had weakened the hegemony militarily, but they had done something more important. They had proven that the alliance was not just about humans and Xanathi. It was about a new way of thinking that any species could choose to embrace. Elder Kalen had grown stronger since the first battle. His crystal form now blazed with confidence instead of uncertainty. The other Xanathi had followed his lead, abandoning their ancient neutrality to join the cause. Their ships moved through space like shining mountains, carrying a message of hope to every world they passed. But Kalen knew that the final battle would be the hardest test yet. The remaining hegemony forces were desperate, and desperate beings were dangerous. They would fight with the fury of cornered animals, using every weapon and tactic available to them. The Alliance fleet assembled at the edge of the Rigel system. Helen counted over 2,000 ships from dozens of different species. Humans provided the determination and tactical skill. The Xanathi offered wisdom and emotional guidance. The defected hegemony species brought knowledge of enemy strategies. Hundreds of other races contributed whatever they could. Captain Bill Rogers commanded the lead assault group. He was a veteran of the liberation campaigns, and his crew had learned to work seamlessly with their Xanathi partners. Elder Zara had chosen to accompany his ship personally, her crystal form integrated into the bridge systems. All ships, this is Commander Carter, Helen's voice carried across the fleet. Today, we end this war, but we do not end it through conquest or revenge. We end it by showing our enemies that there is a better way to live. Fight with courage, but also with mercy. Destroy what must be destroyed, but save what can be saved. Show them what we fight for. The battle began as the Alliance fleet entered the Rigel system. The hegemony forces opened fire immediately, their weapons lighting up space with deadly energy. But the Alliance ships did not respond with blind aggression. They moved with purpose and precision, targeting specific enemy vessels. While avoiding unnecessary destruction, Elder Zara reached out with her consciousness, touching the minds of the hegemony crews. What she found surprised her. Many of them were not filled with battle rage as expected. Instead, they were afraid and confused. They had been told that surrender meant death, that the Alliance would show them no mercy. They do not know we offer them a choice, Zara reported to Captain Rogers. They fight because they believe they must. Rogers nodded and opened a communication channel to the enemy fleet. Hegemony vessels, this is Captain Rogers of the Alliance fleet. You have been told lies about us. We do not seek your destruction. Surrender now, and you will be treated with dignity. Your families will be safe. Your homeworlds will be protected. You have my word. The response was immediate weapons fire from the nearest hegemony ship. But Rogers noticed that some of the other enemy vessels hesitated before firing. The seeds of doubt were being planted. The battle raged for hours. Alliance ships used their superior coordination to outmaneuver the enemy fleet. Human tactical skill combined with Xanathi emotional guidance created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They fought with deadly efficiency, but also with restraint, offering quarter to defeated enemies and protecting civilian vessels. Caught in the crossfire, Slowly, the tide began to turn. Individual hegemony ships started breaking off from the main fleet. Some tried to escape, but others powered down their weapons and requested terms for surrender. The Alliance accepted every surrender, treating former enemies as future allies. Commander Vex watched his fleet disintegrate from the bridge of his massive dreadnought. He had built his empire on fear and strength, but now his own forces were abandoning him. The Alliance was proving that there was something more powerful than terror. Hope. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Admiral Thrak is requesting permission to open negotiations with the enemy." Vex felt rage building in his chest. Admiral Thrak had been his most loyal subordinate for decades. If even Thrak was considering surrender, then the war was truly lost. "No negotiations," Vex snarled. "We fight to the end. All ships ramming speed. If we cannot win, we take as many of them with us as possible." But something unexpected happened. Instead of following his orders, Thrak's ship powered down its weapons. One by one, other hegemony vessels did the same. Vex found himself commanding a fleet that refused to obey him. The moment of truth came when Thrak himself appeared on Vex's communication screen. The grizzled admiral looked tired but resolved. "Commander Vex," Thrak said quietly, "I have served you faithfully for 30 years, but I cannot serve a cause that fights against mercy itself. These Alliance forces have shown us what we could become if we chose a different path. I choose that path now." Vex felt his world crumbling around him. "You are a traitor and a coward, Thrak. History will remember you as the fool who threw away a galactic empire." "Perhaps," Thrak replied. "But I would rather be remembered as someone who chose to stop fighting a war that should never have been started." Within 6 hours, the hegemony fleet had effectively ceased to exist. Some ships had been destroyed in battle, but most had simply surrendered when their crews realized they had a choice. The Alliance had won not through superior firepower, but through superior principles. Elder Kalen found himself on the bridge of Vex's captured dreadnought, facing the former hegemony leader in person. Vex was smaller than Kalen had expected, a being whose cruelty had grown from fear rather than true strength. "You have destroyed everything I built," Vex said bitterly. "My empire will crumble without strong leadership." "Your empire was built on suffering," Kalen replied gently. "It was already crumbling from within. We simply offered your people a reason to choose something better." General Paul Turner, the Alliance's military commander, joined him in the detention area. Paul had fought in dozens of battles during the war, but he took no pleasure in victory. Too many good people had died. "To reach this moment, what happens now?" Vex asked. "Do you execute me? Put me on trial? Make me a symbol of your victory?" Paul considered the question carefully. "We put you on trial, yes, but not to make you a symbol. To give you a chance to understand what you did wrong and choose to do better." The concept seemed to confuse Vex. "You would give me a chance to reform? After everything I have done?" "That is what we fight for," Kalen explained. "The belief that any being can choose to become better than they were. Even you." The aftermath of the war brought changes that rippled across the galaxy. The Galactic Protection Accord was established, signed by over 200 species. It was not a military alliance in the traditional sense, but a commitment to defend the innocent and oppose oppression wherever it arose. The freed, hegemony worlds were not conquered or occupied. Instead, these were offered aid in rebuilding their societies based on principles of freedom and dignity. Many former hegemony soldiers became peacekeepers, using their military skills to protect the very people they had once oppressed. Elder Kalen addressed the Galactic Council for the first time in Xanathi history. His words were transmitted to every inhabited world, translated into thousands of languages, but carrying the same essential message. For 3,000 years, My people believed that wisdom meant avoiding difficult choices. We thought that peace came from withdrawing from the conflicts of the universe. But humanity taught us that true wisdom comes from engaging with those conflicts and choosing to do what is right, even when it is hard. General Turner stood beside the crystal being as they announced the formation of the new galactic order. We learned that our greatest strength was not our willingness to fight, but our willingness to sacrifice for others. When that sacrifice was guided by wisdom and restraint, it became something that could change hearts as well as history. The war had ended, but something greater had begun. Species that had been enemies were learning to work together. Worlds that had been divided by fear were finding common ground in shared values. The galaxy was discovering that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice.